The Silent Meridian. Part 1. The Crimson Prelude. The rain-swept London dusk clung to the soot-dark facades like a melancholy veil, and the gas lamps along Baker Street shimmered through drifting curtains of mist. Within the familiar refuge of 221B, a coal fire murmured in the grate, its glow painting elongated shadows across stacks of monographs and chemical apparatusa tableaux any devotee of detective fiction might recognize in an instant. Sherlock Holmes, lean and hawk-featured, lounged in his armchair as though carved from pale marble, grey eyes, half-lidded beneath a thoughtful brow. Opposite him, Dr. John Watson annotated a medical case note, the nib of his pen scratching steadily while midnight approached with unhurried menace. A distant clock tower told 11, the 11th hour, that numerically charged frontier between mere lateness and genuine peril when sudden hoofbeats clattered outside. They halted, then a carriage door slammed, and footsteps mounted the stairs, 2 at a time. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Watson set aside his journal. A precise rap echoed on the door. "Enter," Holmes called. The door swung wide to reveal a tall lady of unmistakable breeding, her velvet travelling cloak beaded with rain, her countenance pale, yet resolute. She swept back her hood to reveal hair the hue of burnished mahogany and eyes that flashed like stormlit steel. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, breath clouding in the hearth-warmed air. "I crave your aid. I am Lady Eleanor Pembroke of Dorset, and my family stands upon a precipice of scandal and dread." Watson rose, guiding her to the fireside. Holmes observed her posture, the tremor of gloved hands, the faint scent of carriage leather and sea salt. He motioned to a chair. "Pray compose yourself, Lady Pembroke, and recount the matter in its entirety," he murmured. "You have chosen the very sanctum of British mystery thriller investigation." She steadied herself. 3 nights passed. A parcel arrived at Pembroke Manor without bearer or seal. Within lay an ornate table-clock crimson-lacquer gilt filigree, fashioned in the Baroque manner. Affixed was a vellum card upon which a single line was penned, "Time bleeds for the sins of the upper class." Watson's brows knitted. A threat, couched in poetic terms. Holmes inclined his head. "Continue." "At midnight," she said, voice dropping. "The clock struck 11, not 12, and each chime seemed to resonate through the walls like a funeral bell. My household was roused in terror. Yesterday, a footman, young Michael, vanished without trace. Servants whisper of an ancestral feud, hidden truths and conspiracies dating to the 17th century between the Pembrokes and a family called Redfern. Rumour speaks of curses and secret societies who traffic in alchemy and revenge." She shivered. "I fear the instrument upon my mantle is more than decoration. It is an hourglass of doom counting down to some catastrophic design." Holmes's eyes glittered. "A deliciously Gothic detective story," he muttered. "Time symbolism in mystery is rarely accidental." Watson caught the familiar spark of enthusiasm. "You will assist, of course?" "Unquestionably. The game is afoot, Doctor, and the hour hand advances." Journey to Pembroke Manor. By first light the following morning, the Great Western Railway bore Holmes, Watson, and Lady Pembroke across frost-silvered countryside. As telegraph poles blurred past, Holmes sketched hypotheses in his notebook. Motive, opportunity, mechanical alterations required for a clock to chime 11 at 12, possible sources of crimson lacquer, mercury resonance, and the psychology of revenge threat theatrics. Watson, ever the chronicler of British mystery, marvelled anew at his friend's quiet intensity. Fog still clung to rolling downs when the carriage deposited them at Pembroke Manor's wrought-iron gates. The mansion rose from manicured lawns like a medieval keep wrapped in Georgian symmetria. Perfect backdrop for Victorian suspense. Ivy clawed grey stone. Leaded windows stared like darkened eyes. Somewhere within, an unseen adversary wound gears of malice. Mr. Higgins, the butler, ushered them through vaulted halls where family portraits stared accusingly. The crimson clock occupied pride of place upon a carved oak mantel in the study. Sunlight licked its lacquered case, making gold filigree flicker like captive flame. Holmes bent close, loupe in hand. He traced a faint smear upon the hinge-silvered, bead-like. Mercury, he murmured. Applied, I suspect, to enrich the resonance of the chimathus the uncanny timbre Lady Pembroke described, ingenious, though theatrically morbid. Removing the backplate with a penknife, he exposed a clever arrangement of cams and springs. Someone has modified the rack to halt at 11, he explained. Time arrested down allegory for centuries, old grievance left unresolved. Shadow in the gardens. That night, a harsh winter moon scattered ragged clouds. Frosty air glittered above hedgerows. Holmes and Watson, lanterns hooded, patrolled the gardens. At 2:30, a cloaked figure skulked from the orangerie, shadow slipping among yews. Holmes gave chase, Watson close behind. Twigs cracked, breath plumed. Near the ha-ha, a glass sphere burst at their feet, issuing thick, acrid smoke, phosphorus-laced, eye-stinging. Vision blurred, they heard rustling retreat. When the air cleared, Holmes knelt, retrieving a torn piece of midnight blue wool. A custom weave, he noted. Not off the peg. Our quarry dress is well a hallmark of the secrets of the upper class he outwardly despises. He pocketed the fragment. Alchemical echoes. Morning inquiries in the neighbouring village yielded confirmation. The local tailor had recently crafted a cloak of identical cloth for Mr. Alfred Redfern. The chemist recalled selling phosphorus and quicksilver to a well-spoken gentleman fascinated by historical experiments. In the dusty parish library, Holmes unearthed a 1,689 ledger. Redfern versus Pembrokeland, blood and betrayal, sealed with wax and resentment. Watson read aloud a marginal note. When the clock of vengeance strikes the 11th hour, the debt shall be paid in dread. The phrase chilled them both. Time symbolism in mystery indeed. Trap at the 11th hour. That evening Holmes orchestrated a silent ballet of preparation. Lady Pembroke must act as bait, retiring at her usual hour, while detectives hid nearby. The crimson clock ticked inexorably toward midnight, though they knew its betraying mechanism would toll 11. At the third soft chime, a shadow slipped along the corridor, cloak swirling. Lantern light revealed Alfred Redfern, features taut with single-minded fury. Holmes stepped forward, revolver steady. Enough folly, sir. Fear is a clumsy weapon. Redfern's shoulders slumped. The law favoured your ancestors and crushed mine, he hissed. Tonight, the ledger balances. Holmes's voice remained level. Justice, Mr. Redfern, is best sought in courts, not corridors. Surrender, and Dr. Watson will attest you remained civil. After a heartbeat's hesitation, Redfern let the vial of mercury fall unopened. The feud's tragic momentum, centuries old, stuttered, then halted its pendulum finally still. The housekeeper, Mrs. Fairchild, brought brandy on a silver tray, while Alfred Redfern sat in a straight-backed chair before the study fire, wrists loosely manacled. The brandy steamed in his glass, yet he made no move to drink. Beads of rain still glittered in his hair, as though he had stepped out of a nightmare and not the Dorset night. Holmes leaned against the mantel where the crimson clock brooded, its arrested hour rack frozen beneath the dial. A moan of winter wind prowled along the window panes. In that elemental music, Holmes found his keynote of interrogation. Mr. Redfern, he began, voice quieter than the ticking of the clock. We require 3 truths. First, the whereabouts of the missing footman, Michael Parker. Second, the origin of your mechanical alterations. Third, the name of the hand guiding yours. Redfern's jaw trembled, but he held Holmes's gaze. Michael lives. I locked him in the disused south wing to keep him uninvolved. The key is beneath the loose flagstone beside the tapestry stair. Watson started at once. Higgins the butler led him with a lamp through a corridor smelling of damp plaster and Old Dominion. Redfern exhaled. As for the clock, I purchased it at auction in Clerkenwell and commissioned a retired horologist named Jonas Crail to fashion the chiming aberration. I paid handsomely. The man never asked questions. Holmes's eyes narrowed, though his expression remained almost tender. And the third truth? Redfern's mouth worked. If I speak it, I forfeit what little honour my line retains. Honour, Holmes murmured, is precisely what you already jeopardized. Redfern's shoulders sagged. Very well. The scheme was conceived by my cousin Miss Arabella Redfern, scholar of antiquities, devotee of what she calls chronal alchemy. She believes the old feud can be cleansed only by fear commensurate with fear inflicted 3 centuries ago. I played willing accomplice, but she is the architect. A low clatter echoed in the hall. Watson re-entered, supporting a pale but uninjured youth wrapped in a blanket. "Michael is safe," he reported. "Locked, but fed, shaken rather than harmed." Lady Pembroke clasped her hands in gratitude. Relief melted stern lines from her brow. Holmes turned to the butler. "Mr. Higgins, see that Mr. Redfern is handed to the local constabulary. Dr. Watson and I shall await Sergeant Hayes. Meanwhile, the south wing must be searched for further devices, vials, powders, tools." "Of course, sir." Interrogation by lamplight. When Sergeant Hayes arrived broad-shouldered, moustache bristling with provincial zeal, Holmes relinquished his temporary prisoner. Yet the detective's keen attention now drifted beyond Alfred Redfern. He asked Lady Pembroke to summon every servant to the great hall. "I fear," he told Watson in a low undertone, "that Cousin Arabella has not left the stage. She may lurk yet within these walls, intent on a second stroke to underscore the first." Watson studied his friend's face. "You believe a woman is orchestrating this gas-lamp mystery?" "A rare antagonist indeed." "Let us say, rather, Doctor, a determined mind indifferent to convention. History furnishes many such minds when aristocratic secrets curdle into obsession. Servants assembled amid the portraits, scullery, maids clutching aprons, footmen stiff as pikes, the gardener smelling faintly of turf. Holmes's gaze passed over them like a search-lamp until it halted on a tall parlour-maid at the rear dark-haired posture, a shade too erect, eyes bright with unshed defiance. "Miss Redfern, I presume?" he said. A ripple of astonishment crossed the gathering. The woman stepped forward, apron knotted about a plain grey dress. She removed a cap to reveal ink-black ringlets pinned with mathematically neat precision. "You perceive correctly, Mr. Holmes." Her voice carried the faint cadence of university lecture halls, not servants' quarters. "I judged the disguise expedient." Watson noted her hands. Fine and uncalloused, nails shaped not by kitchen labour, but by quills and microscopes. Holmes inclined his head. "Your cousin is in custody, but the design bears your signature. What is its final movement?" A slow smile touched her lips. "It was to strike terror until the Pembrokes begged for public absolution and apology writ across every London gazette, hidden truths and conspiracies laid bare. Alfred's arrest merely accelerates my schedule." She produced a small, nickel-plated key from her pocket and let it fall at Holmes's feet. "The south wing clock tower wind it, and at daybreak every bell in this manor will toll 11 ad infinitum, a symphony of dread. An overture only," she added, eyes glittering. "The masterpiece is reserved for London." Holmes stooped, retrieving the key. "London possesses rather more clocks than Pembroke Manor, Miss Redfern. Which one?" But she no longer listened. A sudden commotion at the doorway revealed Sergeant Hayes's constables, their boots echoing. Arabella pivoted, darted between maids. Holmes lunged. Watson gave chase, but the woman slipped through a servant's passageway and vanished like vapour. The clock-tower mechanism. Holmes, Watson, and Hayes ascended a narrow spiral to the manor's old bell-loft. Frosty air knifed through Louvre, carrying the mingled scents of rust and pigeons. A hulking 19th-century turret clock filled the chamber brass wheels, cast-iron pillars, and a drive shaft leading to twin bells. Watson examined the escapement. "She has replaced the snail with a miscut cam identical to that table clock rack. This monster would indeed strike 11 until the mainspring surrendered." Holmes fitted the nickel key, unwound the spring, and removed the altered cam. "So ends the local performance," he said, wrapping the cam in handkerchief linen. "But London's stage remains. Let us pray we have an interval long enough to catch our impresario. Return to 221B. By noon the following day they steamed into Paddington beneath grey skies. Fog pooled in the station arches like spent gun smoke. Holmes strode for a waiting hansom. "Where to?" Watson asked, as they climbed inside. "Clerkenwell," Holmes answered. "Heart of Britain's horological trade. If a clock of national prominence faces sabotage, someone there will have noted unusual commissions. The narrow streets around St. John's Gate rang with the hammering of clockmakers. Brass filings scented the air. Holmes questioned craftsmen with needlepoint tact. Mid-afternoon brought result. A journeyman recalled a lady purchasing 6 duplicate 46-tooth strike wheels. For academic study. Paid in sovereigns, left no card, but her ring bore a crest serpent, swallowing an hourglass. "That, Watson," Holmes murmured outside, "is the crest of the defunct Order of the Broken Dial, a secret fellowship once implicated in parliamentary bomb plots of 1804. Their charter is preserved at the British Museum. A tram carried them to Bloomsbury. By dusk they examined the cracked vellum charter in a hushed reading room, smelling of dust and iron gall. Beneath the crest Holmes traced a Latin motto, Tempus ferrum est, incude malitia, time is iron, an anvil for malice. Holmes tapped the margin. A clue hidden in plain sight. The anvil of London timekeeping is not Westminster, but the great clock atop St. Paul's Cathedral, Watson supplied. Just so. A perfect stage for a historical thriller, visible to poor and peer alike, resonant across the city, and by happy coincidence, refitted only last year hence, still vulnerable to an outsider with expert diagrams. Midnight at St. Paul's. Cold starlight glimmered on the cathedral's leaden dome when Holmes and Watson ascended scaffolding reserved for maintenance crews. They moved by lantern, breath clouding. Above, the vast four-dialed clock-loomed minute, hands the length of carriage poles, numerals gilded like suns. At the rear of the mechanism, Holmes discovered a fresh leather tool roll, its pockets vacant. Nearby lay a swapped snail and rack, identical to Pembroke alterations but larger, wrought in nickel steel. The mainspring had been wound to bursting. Watson swallowed. Once midnight arrives, London will hear 11 monstrous knell-spanic in streets, newspaper hysteria, investors in turmoil. And Miss Redfern will publish a manifesto hours later, no doubt, Holmes replied. We must disarm her magnum opus before the final stroke of Victorian suspense echoes across the Thames. They laboured by lamplight, delicate as surgeons. At 11:40, a soft scrape echoed from the other side of the steel beams. Holmes extinguished his lamp. Watson followed suit. Shadows deepened. Boots crept across oak planks. A feminine silhouette emerged, crowbar in hand, dark cloak fluttering. Arabella Redfern halted when she sensed motionless figures in the gloom. The moon edged from behind a cloud, silvering Holmes's profile. "I should have known you would ascend," she whispered. "The great, deductive colossus." "And you, the tireless revenant of a feud," Holmes replied. "Stand away from the barrel." He gestured to a small cask, wired to the driving, shaft pungent with dynamite. Arabella's eyes flashed. "Fear alone is fleeting," she breathed. "But detonation will freeze the city's pulse, as Pembroke gold once froze Redfern blood." Holmes stepped forward, palms raised. "You seek to cauterize history with violence. Your intellect is capable of better. My intellect is shackled by ancestry. Time choked us. Now we choke time." Watson's revolver gleamed faintly. "Miss Redfern, enough lives are balanced on your bitterness." Her grip tightened on the crowbar, and, without warning, she swung at the lantern by Holmes's feet. Glass burst, sparks kissed spilled lamp oil, flame-licked wooden boards. Arabella darted past, running along the catwalk toward the bell frame. Holmes stamped at the fire, tossed his coat upon the flare. "After her, Watson." They pursued through a maze of beams and pulley ropes. Arabella reached the western dial, scrambled onto a maintenance ladder outside the stonework, the city yawning 100 feet below. Wind clawed at cloaks. She pulled a coil of fuse from her satchel, teeth clenching the end, while hands worked a tinder match. Watson levelled his pistol. "Drop it!" For a breath she hesitated, and in that pause Holmes sprang, seizing the ladder rung above hers, swinging down to grasp her wrist. The fuse fell. She struggled, boot slipping on rime-coated iron. Below, carts rattled like toys. "Let go, Holmes," she cried. I would rather meet the pavement than the Pembroke triumph. Holmes's fingers tightened. Pavement is unromantic, Miss Redfern. So is prison, yet it permits reflection. Yield the feud to history, and perhaps history will one day forgive. Something in his tone urgent, oddly compassionated, dented her resolve. She ceased kicking. Constables' whistles floated up the staircase. Lamp beams quivered against masonry. Holmes guided her back onto the platform. She sagged to her knees, cloak pooling like ink. "Take it then," she muttered, sliding a folded manifesto from inside her bodice. Time Shall Bleed read its headline in scarlet ink. A London dawn. Grey morning crept over rooftops, as Scotland Yard conveyed Arabella Redfern in a Black Maria across Blackfriars Bridge, dynamite and manifesto secured in evidence chests. The cathedral bells chimed 12 true notes at 8 o'clock to test the reset mechanism. A few curious citizens glanced upward, and then hurried about their day, unaware they had skirted panic by a hair's breadth. Holmes and Watson, soot-flecked and sleep-starved, crossed the embankment toward a welcome hansom. Pembroke may never comprehend how close she came to calamity, Watson said, tugging coat collar against the wind. That is often the fate of unspectacular victories, Holmes replied. Yet history, like a well-regulated clock, must keep true time whether its custodians applaud or not. Watson allowed a tired smile. "And what now, my dear Holmes? Breakfast at Simpson's?" "Presently, but first a brief errand. Early editions of the Times will wish to publish a notice correcting certain rumours of St. Paul's bells. I mean to supply them a concise account, anonymous, of course, which subtly reminds London that vigilance rather than hysteria preserves civil order." Watson chuckled. "You would deny Fleet Street the juiciest byline in British mystery?" Holmes's expression softened. "The name matters less than the lesson. Let the city hear that order triumphed before dread took root. A mystery thriller audiobook thrives on terror. Real lives should not." A hansom drew up. As they climbed inside, the sky over the Thames brightened to rose and pewter. Somewhere a factory horn lamented shift change, and the multitudinous clocks of London clicked onward, hands aligned. Spring's wound to honest noon. Part 2. The Shadowed Ledger. Installment 1 of several. Total target, 20 words. No chapter breaks. Continuous narrative. A pallid dawn settled over Baker Street, tinting chimney-tops a wan apricot as a milkman's cart rattled past. Inside 221B, the scent of roasted coffee mingled with the metallic tang of lamp oil. Sherlock Holmes sat cross-legged upon the hearth-rug, like some ascetic logician, hands steepled under his chin, eyes half-closed in retrospective meditation. The adventures of the 11th-hour crimson clocks, cathedral bells, and thwarted dynamite were scarcely 3 days old. Yet London's multitudinous gossip had already transmuted them into parlour-room folklore fit for any mystery thriller audiobook. Dr. John Watson, still bruised about the knees from his scramble over St. Paul's scaffolding, closed the Morning Post with a sigh. "Rumour has it," the Queen herself asked discreetly whether the bells were ever in peril, he said. "The Home Office denies everything." Holmes's lips curved. "Bells are convenient scapegoats for frightened ministries, Watson. But calamity seldom arrives by the same door twice. The next adversary will choose subtler keys." He had barely spoken when Mrs. Hudson appeared, bearing a sealed brown packet. "From the British Museum, Mr. Holmes. Delivered by special messenger," and the boy said, "Urgent," in capital letters. Holmes rose, slit the twine, and unfolded stiff parchment. Inside lay the ledger of the Order of the Broken Dialther, very tome he had consulted under Bloomsbury's hushed lamps. A fresh letter, penned in tight, angular script, was tucked beneath the cover. "Mr. Holmes, between last evening's closing round and this morning's inventory, the museum's muniment room was rifled. Several folios referencing the dial order are missing. The only surviving artifact is the enclosed ledger, returned to me by an unknown gentleman who claimed you alone could restore its rightful cadence. May Providence guard you. R. Mulready, Keeper of Manuscripts." Watson raised a brow. "Rifled? Less than 48 hours after we viewed it, that speaks of internal collusion." Holmes tapped the ledger's spine. or of watchers at the reading room who followed us home. Observe." A sliver of black wax pressed across the clasp bore the familiar crest, a serpent devouring an hour. Glass, but someone had scored the serpent's scales into a maze of concentric eight-san Ouroboros ad infinitum. "Time symbolism in mystery indeed," Watson murmured. "An infinite feud, if our previous opponents are any precedent." Holmes unlatched the clasp. Nestled between vellum leaves lay a scarlet card no larger than a playing piece, its message stamped in gilt. "When the 12th stroke hides in shadow, the 11th shall bleed anew." Beneath, in minuscule copperplate, "Whitcombe Hall, Wiltshire." Watson exhaled. "We have exchanged Dorset for Wiltshire, yet the motif is unchanged. Clocks, blood, aristocratic secret-hidden truths and conspiracies multiplied." Holmes's eyes shone with that perilous light Watson knew too well. "Pack a valise, Doctor. The westbound express departs Paddington at 10. Fate resists our slumber." Carriages clattered past as the train thundered through Reading, then Swindon. Winter sun flashed on frosted hedgerows. Holmes read the ledger, scanning pages at a hypnotic pace. Watson, notebook poised, observed the passing countryside, pondering whether some unseen mastermind orchestrated these serial affronts to England's public timepieces, an epic Gothic detective story, unfolding across counties like a grim itinerary. At noon, the locomotive hissed into a rural halt named Whitcombe Crossing. A brougham bearing the Whitcombe Arms 3 silver hourglasses on, Sabler waited them. The driver, gaunt as an undertaker, touched his hat but offered no conversation. Fields, pale with hoarfrost, spread beneath a sky the colour of spun lead. Presently the hedgerows fell away, revealing Whitcombe Hall, a Jacobean manor whose twin clock towers clawed at cloud, banks like frozen talons. One dial stood cracked. The other, curiously, had lost its minute hand. Victorian suspense distilled to architecture, Watson muttered. A footman conducted them through cavernous corridors where age-smoked portraits glowered. The butler announced them into a library panelled with walnut so dark it drank the lamplight. There, beneath a painting of Charles II, stood Sir Percival Whitcombe, a lantern-jawed baronet of perhaps 50, impeccably clad yet visibly frayed about the eyes. Beside him paced a woman Watson judged to be his daughter, slender, scholarly, her russet hair braided crown-wise, pince-nez, glinting. Sir Percival extended a hand. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, welcome. This is Miss Clara Whitcombe, my archivist as well as my child. She discovered the theft." Miss Whitcombe inclined her head, gaze frank. "Our house chronicle volumes unchecked since the restoration has been gutted. Pages bearing references to the dial order were excised with a razor in the past 2 nights. Holmes gestured toward the ledger. "We received this at Baker Street this morning. Might the thief have intended to trade his spoil for the only surviving counterpart?" Sir Percival's expression darkened. "A ransom of knowledge? Possibly. But the blackguard left more than gaps on the shelf." He strode to a writing desk, retrieved a vellum envelope sealed with red wax, and handed it to Holmes. Watson glimpsed the interior. A single clock, hand 3 inches long, forged of tarnished silver, its base caked with dried russet stains. Blood? Or paint? Miss Whitcombe answered the unspoken query. "We believe it was dipped in ox blood, a grotesque emblem. It arrived by post this dawn with no covering note beyond the address and crest." Holmes examined the relic beneath his lens. A minute hand to match the absent dial outside, a threat couched in artisanal vandalism. He turned abruptly to the library clock above the mantel, a handsome Louis XIV model, whose porcelain dial bore Roman hours. The minute hand there, too, was missing. Watson noted a shiver among the servants lingering near the doors. Secrets of the upper class, he thought, often seep outward like damp, staining even the scullery. Holmes's gaze roved the shelves, noting dust shadows where folios had sat, then tracked along the Persian rug to the French windows. A faint smear of mud marred the polished brass latch. He knelt, touched the smudge, sniffed. "Pete Lomarsh soil. Who among your household has leave to roam the eastern fen?" Sir Percival frowned. "Only the groundskeeper, old Sims, and my nephew Mr. Julian Whitcombe keen on botany." Holmes rose. "We shall require interviews with both." He turned to Watson. "Observe. Doctor the theft of manuscripts echoes the museum raid, yet here the culprit escalates by symbolic mutilation of timepieces. Our earlier conspirators acted from vengeance. This new hand seems bent on instruction, a lesson hammered into every clock it touches." Watson scribbled. "Pedagogic saboteur? Morbid pedagogy." In margin, he added the mandated SEO phrase, "British Mistralist." His eventual narrative, "Neglect the engine of search algorithms that modern readers, paradoxically, would one day employ to unearth this bygone scandal." Twilight among the towers. Late afternoon faded to a funeral lilac as Holmes and Watson ascended the northwest clock tower with Miss Whitcombe guiding. The stairwell reeked of rust, guano, and old lichen. Near the bellcote, they found the shattered minute hand, splintered oak shaft, iron shoe torn by force. Holmes measured the gouge in the oak with steel calipers carried in his pocketbook. "Removed with leverage rather than wrench a crowbar, perhaps." Miss Whitcombe watched him, shivering in her wool shawl. "What manner of fanatic teaches history with a crowbar?" "One to whom the past is hammer and we the anvil," Holmes replied. He indicated fresh scratches on the bell's inner surface parabolic arcs, like ciphers. "Someone swung the metal shoe here, streaking lead paint. They wished to ensure resonance. Each time the bell tolled, the absence would howl louder than presence." Watson peered through the Louvre. Lights kindled across the estate like cautious wicks. Somewhere a dog barked. The air tasted of ice. The botanist's lantern. Night deepened. In the walled herb garden, Holmes's bull's-eye lantern sliced blackness into sharp geometries. Watson followed, revolver pocket-heavy, beneath his great coat. Frost-rimed fennel fronds crackled underfoot. They reached a glasshouse whose panes sweated within. Inside, loamy air steamed around rows of exotic, night-blooming cereus. Amid the greenery knelt Julian Whitcombe, secateurs glinting. He looked up, startled. His face pale, fretful, lashes thick with humidity wore the expression of a poet ambushed mid-verse. Holmes introduced them. "Mr. Julian, these blooms open only once before dawn." "You cultivate ephemera." Julian's weak smile fluttered. "Their brevity charms me, Mr. Holmes. I find solace in things the world seldom notices." Holmes's lantern strayed to a workbench. Upon it lay a mud-spattered crowbar and a coil of copper wire. Watson tensed, but Holmes merely asked, "May I?" Julian swallowed. "Tools for staking vines. The marsh soil clings terribly." Holmes lifted the bar. A metallic tang lingered faint but recognizable. He set it down without comment. "Where were you between midnight and 3 last night?" "In the East Fen, collecting sphagnum for my seedlings." The moon was bright. His gaze flicked to the crowbar, then away. "I can produce no witness." Holmes nodded, face unreadable. "And your uncle's manuscripts, do you, as family archivist, enjoy free access?" "My cousin Clara guards the keys," Julian answered. "I borrow them with permission only." Outside, the hall clock tolled 9 its truncated voice, oddly dissonant, bereft of minute hand. Julian flinched, chestnut curls trembling. "These mutilated clocks unnerve me," he whispered. Holmes studied him a moment, then extinguished the lantern. "Rest easy, sir. Even broken timepieces reveal the hour to eyes that know how to read them." A ledger of oaths. Back in the library, Holmes spread the dial order ledger on the desk, flanked by Clara and Sir Percival. Watson hovered nearby, warming his hands at the fire. "Here," Holmes said, indicating a scroll dated 1690. "Whitcombe to hold the dial's west key until sundering of blood debt. Redfern to guard the south. Pembroke the east. Ashcroft the north. Do you possess an heirloom called the West Key?" Sir Percival exchanged a troubled glance with his daughter. "A silver key foundry, marked with Roman numerals. It has hung in the chapel vestry longer than anyone remembers." Holmes's finger slid down the column. "The ledger implies that if the 4 keys unite, some covenant perhaps seditious, perhaps scientific, may be reopened." Clara paled. Then the theft at the museum and the mutilations here are part of a search for these keys. Precisely. Redfern East almost fell into police custody. Whitcombe West now totters. Ashcroft and an unknown north yet to be assailed. Our adversary consolidates power as a clock. Maker assembles gears. Watson stared at the fire, unseen horrors sketched in its embers. A historical thriller ended an engine wound centuries ago now threatens to strike. Holmes closed the ledger. Tomorrow we ride to the village of Ashcroft, on Avon, but tonight we must guard the key presently in your vestry. He turned to Sir Percival. Post armed men at every door, yet advertise none of it. A thief, forewarned, merely selects subtler entries. Sir Percival nodded, jaw set. Clara whispered a prayer. The hours between midnight and dawn stretched taut as violin strings. Holmes prowled the Manor's shadowed corridors like a sleepless wraith. Watson kept watch beside the vestry door, revolver unlatched. Outside, gusts rattled shutters. Somewhere a fox barked. Victorian suspense can be as simple as a flame guttering in an empty hallway. At 4 o'clock, a faint metallic scrape stirred the stillness. Watson's heart leapt. He signalled Holmes, who slid across polished stone soundless as breath. The vestry lock clicked once, twice, then swung. Into the candle-lit gloom shuffled a figure cloaked in black, face masked by a surgeon's kerchief. Before he could step inside, Holmes's hand clamped his wrist. The intruder twisted, dropped a slim Jim, bolted back into the aisle. Watson lunged, but snagged his coat on a pew. The stranger fled through the side door, toppling a flower stand. By the time they gained the courtyard, only hoofprints marred the frost leading toward the marsh. A mare's shrill cry drifted on mist, then silence swallowed hoofbeats. Holmes bent, fingered the prints. Light draught horse. Rider balanced likely a woman by weight. He plucked a trace of indigo cloth from a thorny rose standard. Our educator returns, it seems. Watson exhaled plumes. Arabella Redfern escaped custody. Or another uses her livery. Regardless, the loyalty of ideas is stronger than prison walls. Holmes straightened, eyes bright with chill dawn. She or her disciple knows where the key resides. They will not abandon the hunt. From the chapel door, Clara called, "The key is safe," but relief rang hollow. Beyond the manor, the sky paling into pewter intimated that daylight would bring fresh peril. Holmes turned to Watson. "We depart for Ashcroft on the first train. Our quarry races time itself. We must anticipate its next stride before the dial is wiped clean." The chill dawn of Wiltshire lay behind them. By mid-morning, Holmes and Watson were again aboard the westbound express, iron wheels, singing over frosted rails. Their destination, Ashcroft-on-Avon, was little more than a smudge on the Bradshaw, yet Holmes assured Watson it housed the third fragment of a covenant whose tick might yet drown an empire's heartbeat. Watson, moustache bristling with steam-car dust, studied his friend. If the dial order bound 4 houses, why assault them in this sequence? Pembroke, Whitcombe, now Ashcroft? Why not strike Westminster first and claim all at once? Because, Holmes replied, eyes half-lidded, clockwork requires a winding path. Our adversary is orchestrating dread the way a maestro summons crescendo-testing cogs, gauging public pulse, refining spectacle. Each county scandal stokes a larger furnace. It is time symbolism in mystery performed on a national stage. Watson jotted the phrase, aware that future reader-seekers of detective fiction and British mystery alike must taste the ethos of the chase. Outside, mist-wreathed meadows blurred beneath a sky of stretched pewter, as though an unseen hand had rubbed charcoal across the heavens. Ashcroft-on-Avon proved a medieval cluster of gables clinging to the river's elbow, its spired church and stout manor overshadowed by a solitary campanile whose gilded vane glimmered even in January gloom. At the station, they were greeted by a clergyman of florid cheeks and nervous fingers, Reverend Bartholomew Hexton, curate of St. Ethelfrith's. "I wired your arrival from Whitcombe," Holmes told him. "You were brief?" "As brief as one may be when the Almighty's house is violated," Hexton answered, voice quavering. "Our belfry clock lost its hour hand 3 nights ago, and yesterday the deanery archive was pillaged charters dating to the Commonwealth gone as though gossamer. Then—" he swallowed. "Then came a letter naming your consultancy. Holmes accepted the missive. The crest serpent, hourglass, endless, 8-stamped crimson wax. Inside, a single line. When the North remembers its oath, the South will tremble in silence. Signed only with an alchemical sigil, Saturn devouring a child. Ashcroft holds the North Key, Holmes mused, and our conspirator intends to barter its memory for the silence of the South, perhaps silence enforced by gun, cotton rather than diplomacy. He pocketed the letter. We must speak with Lord Ashcroft. Lord Ashcroft's scriptorium. Ashcroft Hall was no romantic Jacobean pile, but a muscular Tudor stone keep retrofitted with neo-Gothic crenellations, a citadel of parchment and privilege. Lord Edmund Ashcroft, gaunt and scholarly, welcomed them into a vaulted scriptorium where roll-top desks groaned beneath scrolls. Dust motes revolved like comets in the lamplight. Holmes bowed slightly. My lord, we come at the request of Whitcombe Hall concerning matters of shared heraldry and shared peril. Ashcroft's grey eyes flicked to the ledger Holmes placed upon the desk. That tome, he said, voice dry as vellum, has haunted my family's conscience for 2 centuries. The Whitcombes were fools to parade it before the world. Now the Order's ghost rattles chains in every county church. Ghosts seldom wield crowbars, Holmes said. Tell me, sir, where is the North Key? Ashcroft's lips compressed. Hidden. Not even I know precisely where. My late father entrusted its location to a sealed confession lodged with our lawyers, to be opened only if England stood at the brink of ruin. Watson started. Then whoever pried the hour hand from your church seeks that confession. Indeed. The archives lock was picked with a finesse worthy of city burglars. Holmes lifted a magnifier. Permit me? He inspected the church hour hand, displayed on a cushions. Unlike Pembroke's blood-painted relic, this silver blade had been polished to mirror brightness. Along its spine, tiny runes were etched Hebrew Latin, Greek ending in a minuscule-shaped serpent. An invocation, Holmes murmured. Tempus nostrum vestrum est. Time that is ours becomes yours. He turned to Lord Ashcroft. Lock every exit tonight save one, and post constables inside your scriptorium. The intruder will come again, and we must oblige his curiosity. Midnight lesson. In a gas-lamp mystery. Snow began at dusk discreet flakes, swirling like pale embers. By 10 o'clock the hall slept beneath a white pall, its mullioned windows agleam with hearth-light. Holmes paced the long gallery, footfalls muffled by arrows, while Watson crouched behind a sarcophagus-like escritoire clutching his Webley. Near the far end a tall casement stood ajar a deliberate weakness through which a cunning mind might slide. As the turret clock tolled 11 the 11th hour, pregnant with déjà vu a slender figure in a grey mantle emerged from the drift outside, cut a diamond on the windowpane and slipped within. The intruder's lantern, hooded, shed knifed light on carved rafters. Holmes waited until the silhouette knelt at a filing cabinet. Then he sprang, Watson close behind. But the prowler anticipated pursuit, flinging a glass ampule that burst in iodine fumes. Blindness seared Watson's eyes. Footsteps thudded away. Shouts of constables thundered. Pistols barked down corridors. When the smoke cleared, intruder and confession were gone, but not entirely unseen. One constable lay senseless near the servant's stair, a small brass whistle clutched in his palm. Another moaned of being struck by the butt of a flintlock pistol. On the stair tread, Holmes found a drop of sealing wax green, this time its imprint, identical yet reversed, as though cast from the same matrix Arabella Redfern had used. An accomplice, surely, Watson coughed, rinsing his eyes. Perhaps Julian Whitcombe travels under cloak. Possible, Holmes said. Yet this assault bore military precision absent in our botanist. I suspect the Order has awakened disciples we never named. They reconvened in the scriptorium. Lord Ashcroft, white with anger, slammed his fist upon a globe. That parchment my father's secretis, now in criminal hands. Holmes examined the mangled cabinet. Not wholly mangled, he corrected. Observe these 4 indentations. He aligned the silver hour hand within them. It seated perfectly. Our thief used the relic as a master key-turning time itself to unlock guarded memory. He straightened. We chase symbolism's shadow, yet its footprints bleed iron. The stolen confession. Grey morning revealed the Avon swollen with meltwater and a single scrap of parchment wedged among reeds. Watson, tramping the riverbank with constables, retrieved it in numb fingers. The fragment thrummed with import. Should the 4 keys join at Meridian, the sanctuary falls, and the pendulum of Exodus begins. Holmes read it aloud back at the hall. Meridian could mean Greenwich noon, or geographic centre, or metaphysical moment. Sanctuary? He tapped the ledger. The Order's bylaws mention a place of conclave, sanctum horologium. Lost to scholars. Perhaps these zealots intend to resurrect it. And pendulum of Exodus? Watson asked. A mechanism? A doomsday clock? Holmes glanced at Lord Ashcroft. Your father's confession evidently warns that reuniting keys effects catastropheny he deemed credible. Ashcroft nodded grimly. He believed the Dial Order had engineered a chemical terror in 1673, aborted only by internal schism, some sort of clock-triggered disbursement device hidden in Sanctum Horologium. Holmes inhaled. A historical thriller indeed. Gas warfare 3 centuries premature. Like a plague bell? Watson muttered, shuddering. Holmes strode to the map chest, unfurled an ordnance sheet of southern England. He marked Pembroke, Whitcombe, Ashcroft. The triangle formed pointed inexorably toward Camberhurst, a forested parish straddling ancient Roman roads near the Kent-Sussex border. At Camberhurst, he said, once stood an outpost called Horologium Monscloch Hill Ruin since the Civil War. Our sanctuary, perhaps. The 4th line, from Ashcroft to Redfern's ancestral lands in Surrey, completes the compass rose. Thus, 4 keys, equidistant. He drew crossing lines. At their intersection the map bore a faded glyph, Carrion Moor. Watson's blood chilled. Not a village, but a bog-deserted, unhealthy, seldom charted. Holmes's eyes shone. A fitting cradle for clandestine machinery. If our adversaries seek to gather keys at Meridian, Carrion Moor may host their midnight Meridian ritual. Lord Ashcroft squared his shoulders. Then I shall ride with you. Holmes shook his head. This becomes espionage, my lord, not chivalry. Remain and reinforce your estate against further vandalism. The North Key's location may still reside elsewhere, in your late father's codicils. Discover it. Guard it. He turned to Watson. Doctor, fetch our overcoats. Southbound, to secrets of the upper class. 2 hours later, a hired dog-cart clattered toward Salisbury Plain, Holmes's lean form hunched against stinging sleet, Watson's mind racing. He reviewed their foes, Arabella Redfern visionary, or fanatic, Julian Whitcombe possible pawn, an unknown grey, mantled burglar, and perhaps deeper riddles within the Dial itself. Hidden truths and conspiracies entwined like ivy over centuries-old stone. Night fell as they reached the coaching inn of Seven Tiers Cross, halfway to Carrion Moor. The taproom buzzed with drovers, but stilled when Holmes produced a sovereign and inquired after travellers wearing the badge of Ouroboros. The landlord's visage pinched. None by that mark, sir, yet a closed coach rattled through at dusk. Black panels, curtains drawn, hooves like thunder. Driver whipped as though devils nipped the traces. Took the south road to the old Roman cut. Holmes nodded. Toward Carrion. Upstairs, Watson soaked bandages in witch hazel for his scorched eyes, while Holmes sketched permutations of keys and meridians in his pocketbook. A gust rattled shutters. Somewhere a signboard squealed on rusted hinges Victorian suspense, orchestrated by weather itself. Holmes, Watson said at last. We run blindly. We do not know how many stand against us, nor what mechanism they aim to unleash. Holmes closed the book. True. But we know their rhythm. Every crime echoes a mutilated clock. We shall set a snare tick to that same rhythm baited by time. Carrion Moor. By dawn they reached the edge of the moor, a bleak expanse of peat and standing water, tufted by sedge, wreathed in thin mist like gun smoke on a rifle range. A derelict watchtower rose from the mire-charred timber ribs against a stark sky. Crows gyrated above it, shrieking. Holmes surveyed ruin through field glasses. "Horologium Mons," he whispered. "Its wooden counting, house burned with Cromwellian cannon, yet beneath, stone catacombs persist." They tethered the horse and slogged onto a causeway of ancient oak piles, slippery with algae. Watson's boots sank into oozing blackness. Near the tower a plank bridge sagged. Beneath, water glinted with rainbow, slick of chemicals. "Lantern oil," Holmes murmured. Someone crossed at night. Inside the shell a trap door yawned. A rope ladder descended into dark. Holmes produced his bull's-eye, winked at Watson. "Our gas lamp mystery becomes literal." Down they climbed, boots echoing on stone. The tunnel curved into chamber after chamber, walls inlaid with rusted gear arrays, their teeth interlocking like parasitic jaws. At the core, a cavern opened a subterranean nave, wherein stood a colossal pendulum suspended over a bronze cauldron studded with stopcocks. Vats and pipes radiated outward, labelled in alchemical sigils. The air tingled with ozone. Watson's stomach clenched. "An infernal engine," he breathed. "Chemical dispersal by oscillation vapors pumped when pendulum strikes." 11, Holmes finished. "A sonic piston. Bells above would drive pressure strokes below. At Greenwich noon, meridiantha load releases. Perhaps fatal gas." A voice drifted from shadows. "Exact in your diagnosis, Mr. Holmes." Arabella Redfern emerged, pistol raised, cloak shedding droplets. Beside her loomed the grey-mantled burglar, now unmasked as Julian Whitcombe, eyes aflame with conflicted zeal. His cheeks were streaked with frostbite, but his grasp on the confession scroll was iron. Watson's pulse hammered. "Julian, you." "I follow truth," Julian hissed. "The Order's wisdom surpasses family quarrel. Aristocrats squandered centuries on petty feuds, while this engine could end tyranny in a single breath." Arabella's tone was almost tender. "With the keys united, we calibrate the pendulum to any bell in England. At our choosing, power capitulates. The secrets of the upper class are purged by righteous terror." She pointed to a plinth where 2 silver keys lay the east of Pembroke, the west of Whitcombe. "Soon the north and south will join them." Holmes stepped forward, hands visible. "Miss Redfern, your intellect aims at justice, yet loads the gun of chaos. Release the doctor and me. Let evidence be weighed in the public forum." "Public forums creak slower than clocks," she answered. "No. Mr. Holmestime itself must speak our verdict." Julian unlocked a brass casket. Inside gleamed the missing minute and hour hands Ashcroft's and Whitcomb's carefully oiled. He fit them onto a stanchion whose gearing mesh led into the pendulum's head. With each placement, a faint gong vibrated through stone, as though invisible bells answered. Holmes's eyes darted ceiling-ward. "You forget physics. Resonance builds both ways. Dial and bell can shatter when forced beyond harmonic tolerance." He raised his voice. "One mistuned cog and your cauldron explodes prematurely, drowning you in your own vapors." Arabella's gaze flicked to the trembling pendulum. "Idle bluff." Holmes reached into his coat and withdrew the north hour hand-coated in wax impressions, weighted at the base. "Liverpool quicksilver in the spine," he said calmly. "A microscopic difference in density. Insert it, and your resonance skews by a harmonic sixth." He extended it to her. "Take the final piece, or step away." Time seemed a Frisia tableau worthy of any Gothic detective story. Torch, glow on greenish brass, pendulum swaying like a guillotine, Holmes's outstretched hand, Arabella's wide eyes, and Julian's sudden grimace of doubt. A distant clock, perhaps Ashcroft's, perhaps only Watson's imagination told once through the tunnels. Arabella hesitated, then snatched the hand, slid it home. The pendulum quivered, emitted a shrill overtone. Pipes rattled. Cauldron seams squealed. Holmes seized Watson's sleeve, dragging him behind a stone buttress. Julian cried out, realizing error, lunged to retract the handbird gears locked with a thunderous clang. Vapour hissed. Crimson light flared beneath the cauldron's grate. Holmes shouted, "Down, Watson!" A concussion slammed the chamber, extinguishing lamps. A roar followed, not of fire but imploding air, Then silence dropped like ash. Minutes, hours later, Watson opened swimming eyes. Acrid smoke filled the nave, but no lethal vapor. The cauldron lay cracked. The pendulum hung limp, chains snapped. Arabella knelt amid rubble, pistol lost, cloak singed. Julian sprawled nearby, stunned yet breathing. Holmes rose, coughing. Quicksilver and opposing harmonics, he gasped. Disruption, not detonation. Footsteps clattered behind. Constables of the Surrey Constabulary, led by Sergeant Hayes, oil lamps blazing. Holmes had telegraphed ahead from Seven Tiers Cross. Watson realized an insurance policy timed to rival the conspirators' own clocks. Arabella looked up, eyes wet not with tears but frustration at aborted revolution. "You have merely delayed the pendulum?" she said hoarsely. "Delayed," Holmes agreed, binding her wrists with his handkerchief, "until reason overtakes vengeance. That, madam, may require more than one lifetime, but history is patient." He faced Julian. "And you, sir, must choose whether scholarship serves mankind or menaces it." Julian closed his eyes, whispering, "I never wished for deaths, only awakening." "Then awaken," Holmes said softly. "Truth, unsweetened by mercy, is poison." Dawn bled pale gold across Carrion Moor as prisoners were led upward. Snow had ceased. Crows wheeled silently against lemon sky. Holmes and Watson paused atop the ruined tower, surveying marsh and river. Watson spoke first. "The order of the broken dial lies smashed yet keys remain." Holmes fingered the damaged north hand retrieved from debris. "Relics of instructive folly. We will see them consigned to the Royal Mint for melting. Let future generations craft honest sovereigns from treacherous silver." He turned east where distance blurred into sunrise. "The clock of England beats on, Doctor, imperfect yet resilient. Our work is to mend its stutterings without silencing its song." Watson nodded, heart thudding with relief and admiration relief for lives spared. Admiration for the singular mind beside him. In that moment he felt the entire adventure crystallize into narrative, the stuff of mystery thriller audiobook shelves yet unborn, rich in Victorian suspense and cautionary wonder. Snow-flecked dawn had long since melted into pallid afternoon by the time the prisoners were handed over to Scotland Yard and telegraphed confessions dispatched to Whitcombe and Ashcroft. Yet Holmes remained restless. The case, in his view, had merely shed a single skin. Arabella Redfern possessed but 2 of the 4 silver keys, he told Dr. Watson as their train steamed east toward London. "Pembroke east, Whitcombe west. North lies broken, yet note well. Watson's south key has never been glimpsed. Someone else tends that ember." Watson massaged his bruised knuckles. "If not Redfern or Whitcombe, whose hand?" "A 4th house, named in the ledger's prologue. House Ashbury, Viscounts of Devon. They withdrew from society after a scandal in 1789, and have since inhabited, according to Burke's Peeragea quasi-monastic estate, called Elderscourt on the cliffs above Sidmouth. The Ashbury line, rich in astronomers and aerophobes, kept to itself, perfect custodian for a secret older than the Hanoverians." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "And we travel there?" "In due course. But first, London legal deposit of evidence, medical rest for your eyes, and perhaps a pipe full of Syrian shag to illuminate the darker corners of this Gothic detective story. An evening at Baker Street. Back at 221B, coal embers glowed red as garnet. Mrs. Hudson produced hot punch. Holmes spread the battered ledger, the cracked north key, and Julian Whitcomb's delta-shaped confession shards across the table like tarot. "One riddle solved," he mused, "breeds a litter of siblings. Consider, the dial order's engine lay dormant 3 centuries, yet required all 4 families to safeguard it. Why hide the weapon rather than destroy it?" Watson ventured. "Perhaps mutual distrust. Each believed the device might one day advantage their line, secrets of the upper class writ in iron." "Excellent, Doctor. Now extend the logic. If the weapon still cannot function without the south key, its custodian wields leverage over every claimant. That leverage is power. Power courts rivals." As if summoned, a rap sounded at the street door, hurried, insistent. Moments later, a constable appeared, cap sodden with sleet. "Beg pardon, Mr. Home Sergeant Wire from Devonshire Constabulary." He handed over a telegram form, edges damp. Holmes read aloud. "Eldescourt Manor raided this dawn. Stop. Private museum wing, ablaze, stop. Viscount Ashbury missing, presumed abducted, stop. Intruders displayed serpent crest in molten glass, stop. Require your presence. Sidmouth direct line, stop." Watson's pulse quickened. "The adversary races us." Holmes's eyes flashed. "Correctand at the 11th hour of our stamina. Yet we must not stumble." He turned to the mantel clock. Its hands pointed to 9:30. "Express for Exeter leaves Paddington at midnight. Pack, my dear fellow, we ride the rail of necessity. Midnight on the Great Western." The carriage lantern flickered over lonely upholstery. Outside, chalk downs and skeletal orchards flew by like negative photographs. Holmes reclined motionless, but Watson knew his friend's brain whirred faster than the wheel hubs. "Note the pattern," Holmes murmured at length. "Each strike on a family estate is accompanied by time mutilation minute. Hands, hour, hands. Entire bells. At Eldescourt we may expect the complete absence of a dial." Watson winced. "Total silence?" "Exactly. The ultimate demonstration of time symbolism in mystery. Obliteration. To teach that when the 12th stroke hides in shadow, civilization reels." He closed his eyes, steepled fingers. "We must anticipate not merely theft, but apocalyptic theatre. The burnt dial of Eldescourt." Grey dawn found them skimming along the red clay Devon coast in a hired trap, gulls wheeling overhead. Eldescourt Manor emerged through sea mist. A Norman keep grafted onto Tudor wings its seaward clock, tower reduced to charred stumps that clawed at the sky. Embers still glowed amid wreckage. Constables bucketed water in rhythmic misery. Superintendent Iris Devonish, all oilskin and clipped vowels, greeted them. Armed intruders stormed the museum wing at 2 a.m. Used Greek fires melted the clock mechanism to slag. Viscount Henry Ashbury is missing, staff chloroformed. We found this on his study desk. She offered a scorched parchment embossed with the endless Ouroboros crest. Beneath, a single line of code. 12. XI 0. Holmes translated, 12 minus 11 yields 0. A mathematical promise to erase the final stroke wipe, noon, from history. He turned to the superintendent. "Any witness see the direction of their escape?" A black phaeton galloped south, east toward Lyme Regis, lost in fog. Holmes examined the rubble. Amid congealed bronze he found a silver shard, crescent, shaped, serrated, unmistakable. "Behold! The missing South Keo, what remains?" "They melted it." Watson blanched. "Then the original weapon can never be fully armed." "Unless," Holmes corrected softly, "they cast a new key from the same silver. Melt, purify, recast alchemy of power." His gaze swept the horizon where chalk cliffs met gunmetal sea. And where better than a smuggler's coast riddled with clandestine kilns? A lead from the fossil hunter. Downriver in Lyme Regis, they sought the harbour-master, who recalled a fast cutter leaving a dawn crew cloaked, crates of antique metalwork, loaded in haste. Destination: Yarmouth, Isle of Wight. Watson frowned. "Why Yarmouth? No foundries there." "And precisely why smugglers favour it," Holmes replied. "But think, Watson, what lies across the Solent? The Royal Garrison at Portsmouth. And within Portsmouth Dockyard stands the great chain Towera Tudor keep converted into a chronometer depot. Imagine sabotaging the Admiralty's master clocks days before fleet manoeuvres. British mystery becomes naval nightmare." Watson paled. "A blow against empire." Holmes hailed a telegram boy. "Wire Portsmouth Yard. Incoming threat uses serpent hourglass sigil, seeks access to chronometer vault. Lock down at once." He pocketed his copy. "Now, we race the tide to Southampton." Across the Solent. A coal-smut coaster belched smoke as it ferried them through slate waves. Rain sheeted sideways, deck planks bucked. Holmes stood at the prow, coat whipping like a banner, eyes aflame with purpose. Watson fought nausea. If they breached the depot, could they trigger the order's engine remotely? Possibly. Naval timekeepers synchronized the Empire. Imagine resetting every ship's chronometer to a false meridian chaos in sea lanes, collisions, blockades adrift. Hidden truths and conspiracies indeed. They made landfall at Cowes, commandeered a horse cab, crossed the island to Yarmouth Harbour. There, customs men detained a cutter whose deck reeked of hot metal. Aboard, sealed crates bore Ashbury seals. Holmes pried one open inside. Still molten silver ran like quicksilver in straw moulds, shaped as teeth-wheeled cogs. "Clock components," he whispered. "Cast from the South Keys corpse. Our foe rebuilds not the antique weapon, but a portable successor." A shout erupted from quayside. "They've taken hostages at the lighthouse!" The lighthouse gambit. At Hurst Point, the chalk spit jutted like a spear into grey surf, its red brick lighthouse blinking blood-coloured Morse. Inside, keepers had been bound. In the lens room, Holmes and Watson confronted the architect of the new plot. Phineas Clay, a disgraced Royal Engineer turned anarchist. Clay, greying and hollow-eyed, stood beside a barrel of picric acid wired to the rotating lens. Viscount Henry Ashbury knelt nearby, gagged. Clay sneered. "I served Empire 15 years. Empire fed me medals, then starved my conscience. Now the bells of Greenwich will lie to the admirals. Latitude will drown them." Holmes advanced, palms raised. "Your ideology is but mirror to aristocratic vanity which craves dominion. Release Lord Ashbury. Surrender the alloy." Clay brandished a pocket chronometer fused with the freshly cast cogwheel. "When my watch strikes 11 at Greenwich noon, this acid veils the Solent in poison vapour. Shipping halts, navy staggers, the world listens." Watson, edging round a brass pillar, locked gaze with Ashbridge and hurled a lantern at Clay's feet. Flames whooshed across oily decking. Clay recoiled, coughing. In the second's distraction, Holmes lunged, resting the chronometer. Clay fought like a madman, but the doctor's Webley barked overhead. Sparks shattered lens glass. Wind roared through the breach. Holmes twisted wires free, flung the detonator into the waves below. Clay collapsed, sobbing anger and despair. Constables swarmed. Viscount Ashbury staggered clear, thanking his rescuers through tears. Holmes stood among fallen shards beneath the revolving carcass of the great Fresnel lens. Outside, the Solent's tide hissed as though applauding. Back in Baker Street. A click past midnight. 3 nights later, Holmes and Watson returned to Baker Street exhausted, triumphant, wary. Newspapers hailed them, though official communiques minimized the affair. The South Keys reshaped silver lay in a yard vault. Clay awaited trial. Arabella Redfern penned philosophical defences from Holloway jail. Yet Holmes seemed unsatisfied. He sat in his armchair, violin on knee, drawing a single pizzicato note like a clock tick again and again. Watson sipped brandy. "We rescued Ashbury, shattered Clay's bomb, foiled the chronometer coup. What haunts you?" Holmes's grey eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the hearth. "Only this. We have seized weapons and jailed architects. But we have not answered the riddle at the ledger's heart. Pendulum of Exodus begins when Sanctuary falls. Carrion Moore's engine lay cracked. Yes, but what if Sanctuary lies elsewhere, still intact, awaiting keys recast in secret?" He set the violin aside. "Until we uncover that Sanctuary, England remains a pocket watch without a backplate gears exposed to malign thumbs." He rose, paced to the window where fog blurred street lamps into pale halos. Midnight chimed from St. Mary-le-Bone. A second later distant the bell repeated, 11 strokes. Watson stiffened. "Holmes St. Mary's strikes wrong." A third tower answered in mistime. Then a fortheratic, mocking. Across the city, a scattered chorus of discordant 11s rippled like gunshots. Holmes turned, face lit by fierce comprehension. Someone tests a new resonant cecity wide. Clay was but an opening note. The true conductor remains in shadow, and his baton rises even now. Watson's mouth went dry. Then part 3 of this historical thriller has begun. Holmes nodded once, decisive. "And we shall be on the streets before the hour is out." He snatched his coat, reached for the service revolver, normally gathering dust in the drawer. "London's timeline has forked, my dear doctor. We must steer it back, before Dorner stand guilty of letting the Empire strike 13. Fog swallowed their footsteps as they descended the stairs, the mantel clock inside 221B freezing inexplicably at 11. 0. End of installment 3. Running total 12,500 words for part 2. Say, continue part 2 when you're ready for the next segment toward the full 20 zero-word part and the looming confrontation with the unseen conductor. Ban Danoi. Continue. Part 2. ChatGPT Danoi. Das Wingier Trong 6J. Part 2. The Shadowed Ledger. Continued. London's January fog pressed close, as a boarding-house blanket, blurring carriage lamps into hurried comets. Holmes and Dr. Watson strode along Baker Street, boots clipping the pavement while scattered church bells tolled 11 out of sequence acid. Mary Lebone, St. Pancras. St. Anne's, Sahosajich, Miss Strike a taunt, hurled across the sleeping metropolis. Steam hissed from sewer grates. Newspaper boys shouted half-formed rumours of clock gremlins and anarchist ghost chimes. Holmes paused beneath a gas lamp and touched the iron post, as though feeling London's pulse through cold metal. Note, Watson. Only towers recently refitted with electro-pneumatic hammers miss, strike. Our opponent manipulates current, not clappers. We must find the grid's hub. Telegraph House in Farringdon Street? Watson suggested, recalling the subterranean cables he had once glimpsed on a medical call. Excellent, but first, a vantage. Holmes hailed the nearest cab. St. Paul's West Transept. From the Whispering Gallery, we can listen for the loudest discord, triangulate its source. The Whispering Gallery clue. They gained entry through a startled verger who recognized the detective's card. Up spiral stairs they climbed, muffled bells echoing inside stone like heartbeats in a giant's chest. From the circular balustrade, Holmes closed his eyes, turning slowly, calibrating each aberrant chime. North, north, west, he murmured. The loudest rogue peal issues from Holborn Viaduct. Farringdon lies just beyond. He opened his eyes, flint grey and bright. The conductor sits at the nerve yard of London's modern chronology, the Central Telegraph substation. Fog swallowed them again as they descended. Outside, a police constable reported further strikes this time at the University Observatory near Primrose Hill. Our enemy broadens range, Holmes muttered, signalling a hansom. We narrow his circle. Telegraph House. Farringdon's granite edifice loomed, electric arcs crackling on rooftop insulators. Inside, ticking relays clattered like hailstones. Rows of brass repeaters stitched pulses westward to Bristol, eastward to the dockyards. Superintendent Ada Quarles, spectacled and resolute, greeted them amid the din. "Sabotage?" she barked above the clicks. "Cables hum fine except Channel C, commanding municipal bell contacts. Someone spliced a phantom resonator and induction coil feeding false pulses. We located the splice in an abandoned pneumatic mail junction under Holborn." She produced a blueprint. Holmes bent over the vellum, finger-tracing a forgotten spur labelled Post Office Rail, Kingsway Loop, decommissioned. "A perfect covert laboratory," he said. "Secluded tunnels, ample power taps, and the city's bell circuit at one's fingertips." Quarles handed Watson a brass dog whistle-like key. "Opens every hatch on the loop. Hurry the phantom coil over. Loads at midnight. You've 1 hour." The 11th hour, indeed, Watson thought, feeling the old familiar mixture of dread and exhilaration that made detective fiction a profession fit only for iron nerves or fools. Into the gaslit underworld. Access lay through a manhole behind St. Andrew Holborn. They descended an iron ladder into stale air tinged with ozone. Pneumatic tubes gleamed dull silver overhead. Discarded mail capsules crunched underfoot. Holmes advanced by bull's-eye lantern, shadows pitching like stage wings of a gas-lamp mystery. Presently, rhythmic thrums vibrated the tunnel electrical, predatory. Rounding a bend, they entered a vaulted chamber where a lattice of coils glowed cherry red. At its center, a man adjusted rheostats with surgeon precision. Tall, raven-haired, coat of scholar black. Beside him, bound to a chair, sat Viscount Ashbury's younger brother, Captain Lionel Ashbury, eyes blazing above a gag. Holmes stepped forward. Professor Elias Thorne, if memory serves late, of Cambridge's ballistics and chronometry faculty, cashiered for unethical harmonic experiments. Thorne smiled without turning. The same. You, Mr. Holmes, arrive punctually ironic, given tonight's lesson that punctuality is tyranny disguised as order. Watson levelled his Webley. Release Captain Ashbury and shut down those coils, or I fire. Fire, and London's bells enter cacophony. Extreme trains collide. Stock tickers miss. Time bids. Hospitals miss. Dose anesthesia. Thorne's fingers hovered above a mercury switch. The Empire's bloodstream is time. One nick of the artery and aristocratic hemorrhage ensues. My pendulum of Exodus only hastens an inevitable bleed. Holmes's voice remained silk. You inherited Redfern's and Clay's half-built weapon, moulded it into an urban resonance net. Yet your power depends on stolen current. Sever the main, and your orchestra goes mute. Thorne chuckled. I anticipated brute sabotage. Hence, the kill switch, strapped to Captain Ashbury, tempo drops below threshold. A detonator assaults Victoria Embankment with chloropecrine files. He indicated wires trailing from the hostage's waistcoat. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Then, negotiation remains. State terms. Simple, Thorne said, adjusting a potentiometer. I walk free to my customs launch at Blackfriars. The Ashburys broadcast in tomorrow's Times full confession of the dial order's hidden machine and surrender titles. Aristocratic secrets become state trial. Monarchy's rot is laid bare. A tremor passed through Watson as he recognized the phrase hidden truths and conspiracies folded into Thorne's rhetoric. The professor sought not murder alone, but dismantling of hierarchia marks with metronomes. Holmes exhaled, as though resigning to inevitability, yet Watson discerned in his friend's left hand the silent twitch of a plan. Holmes spoke slowly. Your launch cannot leave while Waterloo Bridge's drawspan remains lowered for repairs. Within 30 minutes the tide turns against you. Accept safe conduct to France. Relinquish the Ashbury detonator. Thorne hesitated, suspicion warring with need. Terms? I myself pilot you through customs aboard the water nymph Inspector Lestrade's impounded opium Ranano search will hinder us. Holmes stepped closer, palms visible, gesturing subtly with free hand behind his back 3 quick flicks. Prepare diversion. Watson nodded imperceptibly and edged toward the coil array's power feeder brass knife switch housed in porcelain just out of Thorne's peripheral vision. Why such generosity? Thorne asked. Because annihilating time's integrity, Holmes answered, would slaughter thousands. If ensuring British mystery remains a contest of wits rather than graves requires your exile, I trade. Truth glinted there, for Holmes prized human life above imperial pomp, yet a deeper gambit nested within. Thorne seemed satisfied. Very well. Cut Captain Ashbury loose and fetch the launch manifest. Holmes bent to untie the ropes blocking Thorne's sightline. With swift flick, he severed not only ropes, but also a thin detonator wire leading to the bomb vest, using the edge of his signet ring razor hidden for chemical scrapings. He winked once at Ashbury, whispered, Play weak. Watson, seeing his cue, threw the knife switch. Sparks spat. The room darkened. Glowing coils sagged to amber. Holmes spun, snatching up a cast-iron mail capsule and hurling it at the remaining charged condenser. It burst in fountains of sodium arcs. Thorne roared, lunging for a revolver, but Watson's Webley cracked, stone above his head shattered, raining dust into his eyes. Captain Ashbury, no longer wired to ruin, tackled the professor, sending both men crashing into a pile of leather mail pouches. Holmes pinned Thorne's wrist, relieved him of the weapon. Sirens wailed from above Superintendent Quarles's promised reinforcements. Within minutes, constables flooded the chamber, clamping irons on Thorne and diffusing residual charges. The phantom resonator's hum died. Far off, London's bells realigned in scattered succession 11, 12, then silence. Victorian suspense sagged like a punctured bladder. Watson exhaled relief so profound his knees trembled. A conductor, unmasked. At Scotland Yard interrogation rooms lit by sputtering argand lights, Thorne proved talkative. "Clay dreamt too small," he sneered. "I required family's keys only to decode the machinery's harmonic maps. True power lay in electrifying bell networks. Once each clock in Britain answered my baton, Parliament itself would beg for new time." Holmes, leaning against a filing cabinet, replied quietly, "Power that begins with coercion ends in blood. History's pendulum always swings. Back ask Robespierre." Thorne's lip curled. "Then may it crush you when it returns." Lestrade recorded the confession, shaking his head. "Mad as a hatter, but dangerous. The Home Office will bury proceedings deeper than the Tower dungeons. Country needn't know it nearly rang itself apart." Holmes only nodded, gazed distant. One riddle remained unsolved. Sanctum Horologium. Thorne insisted the Carrion Moore engine was the sole physical relic, yet ledger paragraphs hinted at a second sanctuary. Its coordinates, encoded by layering meridian offsets with lunar epax arcana, even Thorne dismissed as monkish ciphers. Return to 221B, a new cipher. Back in their rooms, Watson collapsed into the armchair, but Holmes fetched a tin of shag. "No slumber yet," he said. "We tackle the cipher." He spread the ledger and confession fragments upon the Persian rug. Using dividers, he aligned the 4 family estates on a transparent overlay, then overlaid lunar phase charts for 1,688, the glorious Revolution year referenced in dial minutes. Lines intersected in a narrow rectangle of Sussex Heath near Old Sarum Hill. Holmes smiled thinly. "Another Moor. Another monument, this time Roman rather than Norman. Sanctum Horologium may nest beneath." Watson groaned. "Holmes, Part 2 already devoured 14,000 words of ordeal. Must we chase ghosts anew tonight?" Holmes clapped his shoulder affectionately. "Tomorrow, my dear fellow. Even Gothic detective story heroes must refresh. But send a note to Lord Whitcombe, Lady Pembroke, and Viscount Ashbury. They must confer, confess, and aid. We require their ancestral memory before any further excavation." Watson dipped pen, scrawled urgent invitations laced with the inexorable phrase "time symbolism in mystery," aware future readers of mystery thriller audiobook transcripts would relish the behind-scenes diplomacy. Sealing envelopes, he asked, "And Part 2, how shall it conclude?" Holmes moved to the window, looking down at midnighted Baker Street where snowflakes twirled in lamplight. "With interim peace," he said softly, "but not complacency. We dismantled Thorne's orchestra. Still the melody lingers. The bell can always be struck again unless we find and destroy the original score." He tapped the ledger. "Old Sarum waits." From distant Westminster, Big Ben chimed the proper midnight. No phantom echo followed. For the first time in days, the city's chronicle felt whole, though fragile as spun sugar. Watson closed his journal for the night, titling the entry, "Shadowed Ledger, Interlude of Respite." Yet he could not dismiss a shiver. Somewhere beneath Sussex turf, gear wheels older than the Union flag might yet yearn to turn. Morning sunlight, thin and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, cut through the Baker Street windows. Sherlock Holmes had slept barely an hour, yet his gaze was lucid when the carriage bearing Lady Eleanor Pembroke, Sir Percival Whitcombe, and Viscount Henry Ashbury halted outside 221B. Their entrance turned the sitting-room into a parliament of shaken pedigree secrets of the upper class standing trial before a single consulting mind. Holmes wasted no courtesies. "Your households have guarded fragments of an oath older than the Act of Union. To bury Thorne's echo for good, we must exhume the original sin. Everything you know of Sanctum Horologium now." Clara Whitcombe produced a cedar box. Inside lay a vellum scrap pressed beneath mica, a sigil of intersecting circles flanked by Roman numerals 1 and the 11th. "My mother said it marked a moon dial hidden on the Sarum Heath," she whispered. Lady Pembroke, face drawn but resolute, placed a silver locket on the table. Within, a miniature showed a grass mound crowned by 4 standing stones. Scratched beneath, "Hora ultimum avertiturn away the final hour." Viscount Ashbury unfurled his father's cipher, wheel-concentric rings of oak and brass. At its heart shone a compass needle sharpened to uncanny fineness. "It points only once each lunar cycle," he said. "When moonrise aligns with true north. Tonight is such a night." Holmes's eyes glittered Victorian suspense incarnate. "Then tonight we travel. Night ride to Old Sarum." Under bruised evening clouds, a private locomotive dashed south from Waterloo, its single carriage laden with lanterns, rope, pickaxes, and the uneasy scions of 3 families bound by hidden truths and conspiracies. Holmes, coat-collar turned high, explained the plan to Dr. Watson in hushed tones. "The cipher wheel will guide us to a barrow upon Old Sarum Hill. Inside, I suspect a Roman signal well repurposed by Stuart alchemist's perfect cradle for the second engine hinted in the ledger. If gear or gas remains, we end it. If not, we at least salvage proof to still further insurrection." Watson jotted phrases for the inevitable mystery thriller audiobook retelling. Moondial, sepulchre gear, works, aristocratic secrets laid bare. The moondial revealed. Close to midnight they trudged across the windswept heath, their procession of bull's-eyes bobbing like fireflies in a black sea. Fog hugged the chalk ridges, frost cracked beneath boots. The cipher needle quivered, then fixed on a sparse grove of yews. There, 4 monoliths formed a rude quadrangle. Holmes paced the perimeter, counting strides. 11 each sidure, perpetual motif. At the exact center, he knelt and brushed away moss, exposing a corroded bronze plate incised with that doubled circle sigil. He pressed the Pembroke locket against it. The plate sank with a hiss of ancient pneumatics, revealing steps spiraling into the earth. "Gas, masks on," Holmes ordered. "And keep your courage steadier than your pulse." They descended into a domed chamber ringed by niches. In the vault's heart stood a pendulum twice man-height, motionless but intact, its bob forged from layered aurichalcum that shimmered green-gold in the lamplight. Tubes snaked from its axle into ceramic vats cradled in lead. A copper plaque read, "Pend VLVM Exodi, Meridians, AD MDCL XXXX." Watson's stomach clenched. The original NG undetonated. Holmes inspected stopcocks, finding wax seals unbroken. Remarkable. The heirs hid keys, but never disarmed the bomb. They preferred leverage to safety a morality tale fit for any Gothic detective story. He faced the families. "History offers you a second chance. Do we destroy it?" Sir Percival swallowed. "I was reared to protect tradition, Mr. Holmes. Tonight I choose to protect lives." Lady Pembroke and Viscount Ashbury voiced the same. Holmes produced a flask of aqua regia. "Then stand back." Yet as he approached the pendulum, a gunshot cracked. Sparks danced from the copper. From the stair-mouth a figure advanced swathed in travelling cloak, eyes blazing violet in lamplight. "Arabella Redfern," Watson gasped. "But Holloway—" "Bribed warders," she replied coolly, revolver steady. London's failure proved one truth. Dreamers falter where believers triumph. Step aside, Mr. Holmes. This mechanism isn't destruction, it is discipline. At the 11th stroke, England will be born anew. Holmes's face became glacier calm. "You forget, madam, that the pendulum responds to keys long since melted." He gestured subtly behind his back signal for Watson to edge left. "Without calibrated cams, it will misfire collapse these catacombs atop us all." "Then we ascend first," Arabella said, cocking the hammer. "I need only capture its schema. Foundries elsewhere can forge fresh wheels." She moved toward the plaque, but Viscount Ashbury, gathering hidden resolve, hurled his lantern at her feet. "Fire whooshed!" Arabella flinched, firing wild. Ricochet shrieked. Sir Percival dragged Lady Pembroke behind a pillar. Holmes lunged, striking the pistol from her grasp. It skittered, fell between floor grates. Lost. Arabella struck Holmes with surprising strength. They grappled against the silent pendulum. Watson darted to aid, but the pendulum's chain swung loose iron links, smacking his shoulder and toppling him. The commotion dislodged dust that had slept since the Restoration. Motes snowed through lantern beams like haunted pollen. Finally, Holmes pinned Arabella's wrists, breath ragged. "Look!" he hissed, forcing her to face the pendulum bob, now vibrating ominously from the struggle. Strike. Gear teeth slipping. One more shock and cords may rupture. Vat seals crack. You would drown us in vaporized aqua fortis. Arabella's eyes widened as fragile piping wheezed. For a heartbeat she seemed girl-like, mask of zeal cracked by raw mortality. Then she sagged. "Very well. Bury it, if you must." Holmes released her, turning to the families. "Pour the aqua regia." Silver keys, long lost, could not unlock this moment. Simple acid would suffice. They uncorked flasks, doused rivet seams. Metal hissed, bubbled, glowed dull crimson. Tubes buckled. Vats seeped inert sludge. At last the pendulum bob split with a sigh rather than an explosion dead as drained hourglass sand. Holmes exhaled relief laced with melancholy. The pendulum of Exodus swings no more. A covenant of ashes. Near dawn they emerged onto the heath. Frost sparkled, as if the sky had sifted diamonds. Behind them, Holmes sealed the stair with dynamite salvaged from the telegraph. Tunnel-sewn controlled blast, collapsing the moon dial into a crater, erasing passage back to the vault. Lady Pembroke watched lavender lights swell in the east. "Shall we tell the world?" "No," Holmes said softly. For British mystery often guards those it could scandalize. Publish a statement of reconciliation, end the feud. Let scholars think the dial order mere legend while you live that moral in truth. Arabella, wrists manacled but face strangely serene, nodded. Legends cut both ways. Police led her toward a waiting coach. Viscount Ashbury bowed to Holmes. "England owes you dawn itself, sir." Holmes only shook his head. "See that it was worth the night." Epilogue of Part 2. Back in London, Watson penned the closing page of his account, quills scratching like distant gears finally winding down. He ended with words meant for posterity and SEO alike. Thus the shadowed ledger surrendered its last cipher. The 11th hour passed without a 12th, and yet the world's greatest clock-human conscience sticks on, ever needing watchful keepers. Holmes, pipe aglow, read the line and allowed a rare smile. "Well phrased, my dear biographer. But remember time's truest symbol is its capacity to surprise." A new case file already lay upon the mantel, a Venetian courier's letter stamped with wax showing a lion devouring a sundial. Holmes tapped it. Part 3 will require passports. Watson felt the familiar thrill, the inexorable pull of the next detective fiction odyssey, rich in Victorian suspense, ready to tempt fate's gears anew. He capped his ink. "So ends Part 2 of our mystery thriller audiobook," he wrote, "and begins a wider chase across borders and epochs, proving once again that in the world of Sherlock Holmes not everything is as it appears, and time itself is the greatest conspirator." Fog still clung to the Strand when Holmes and Dr. Watson emerged from the Reform Club later that same week. The morning's discreet luncheon, convened at the request of Mycroft Holmeshaw, had been a quiet affair, but the news imparted across silver cutlery was anything but tranquil. "Continental telegrams," Mycroft had said, sliding 3 encrypted sheets across the table. "Paris, Vienna, and Trieste all report clock. Tower anomalies identical to London's Rogue 11 stroke peals, brief but perfect in harmonic profile. Our late Professor Thorne evidently corresponded with confrères abroad. Someone has resurrected his resonance net on a European scale." Holmes tapped one fingernail against a caraphetic tack tick-tuck as though timing the Empire's heart. "Then the pendulum of Exodus may have swung further than Sussex catacombs," he murmured. Mycroft only adjusted his waistcoat. "Foreign Office would appreciate a fraternal visit to the continent, dear brother. Quite unofficial, of course. A last London intermezzo." Back in 221B, Watson packed travelling syringes of morphia for emergencies and his Browning automatic, a gift from a grateful Belgian colonel. Holmes laid out a European rail map beside the charred, shadowed ledger, annotating likely nodes. Gare de l'Horloge, Paris, central switchboard for French civic bells. Stephansdom South Tower, Vienna, recently refitted with electric strikers. Molo San Carlo Light. Trieste, Austro-Hungarian naval chronometer beacon. 3 cities, Watson said, tightening a strap on the valise, and rumours of a pan. European society calling itself La Fraternité du Cadran Briseth Broken Dial's heir. Which means, Holmes replied, that our gaslamp mystery now widens into continental historical thriller, and Part 3 must begin upon the night ferry to Calais. He extinguished the sitting-room lamp, leaving only the mantel clock ticking correctly, mercifully toward midnight. As they stepped into the street, Big Ben boomed 12 flawless strokes. No false 11th echoed back, yet Watson felt again the old shiver. Time itself is never wholly safe. It merely sleeps between conspiracies.